Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Bethanne, and today I want to talk about Florida by Lauren Groff. This is a collection of short stories by her. It came out a couple of years ago, so I'm a bit behind the curve. And I read this for my book club, and we just discussed it last weekend, virtual book club. Yeah, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought the writing was really lovely. Groff packs a lot of imagery into her writing, and especially this book, it's called Florida because most of the stories are set in Florida, and they rely pretty heavily on the natural environment to kind of create the setting and even to kind of pull out some of the like emotional things that the characters are feeling. So kind of talking about like Florida heat and humidity in many of the stories can kind of mimic some, feelings of like oppression and dread and things like that, that some of her characters are having in these stories. So that's really cool. I'm not super familiar with Florida, but I've been there a few times. A couple times on like family trips to go to the beaches, but I've also been on some more like natural history focused trips as a birder and someone who likes insects to spend time in some of the cool natural environments of Florida. So I felt like I knew enough to really appreciate that aspect of this book. So as I said, most of the stories are set in Florida, but then I think just two of the stories are set in France and involve characters from Florida going to France. So that's the one of the kind of continuing themes throughout this book. So I really enjoyed it, I think, as I already mentioned, until the last story. So I actually was going to give this 5 stars just as I was reading and just being really caught up in it. And then the last story is the longest story, and it feels like it needed more editing. It feels like it should have been edited down. It's less clear to kind of experience an impact from that story, I thought. And so that kind of left me finishing the book on like a little bit of a letdown. So this is probably more like a 4-star book for me. I think I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads just because in the immediate aftermath I was like, but I loved it. So I think I was thinking like 4.5 stars and rounded up. But anyway, so that if that gives anybody some idea that this was a very enjoyable book. However, some people in my book club didn't like it. Nobody hated it. I mean, the writing is too beautiful to hate it, but I think for some people they felt that maybe like this time in the world was not the time to read it. So I think like many short story collections, it can be a bit of a downer. One of the things that drives the tension in a lot of these short stories is kind of the like a troubling emotional period that the main character in the story is going through, and that's I think probably a quick, easy way to create the tension that you need in a very short space for a short story. So I'm not a writer, I don't really know, but all of these stories are kind of profound and sad in one way or another. I actually really appreciated that. It might just be that I'm a downer of a person and a bit of a pessimist, but I love stories that just kind of talk about how hard it is to be human. And especially today, we're just drawn in so many directions, have so many competing interests and so many demands on our time. That it can be really hard. And so I think these stories are kind of real and accurate and reflective in that way. So some of the things that Lauren Groff, I think, seems to be ambivalent about as a person, because they come through in the book. Yes, there's a lot of ambivalence about kind of Florida, and she herself, the author, is a transplant to Florida. She grew up, I want to say in Ohio, but anyway, somewhere cooler. Temperature-wise, Florida is a very cool state in terms of awesomeness. So she's a transplant, and so a lot of the characters in this book are also transplants to Florida, excuse me. And even the ones that aren't, they are kind of struggling with some of the harder parts about living in Florida, again, which are often rooted in the climate and the natural history of Florida. So there's some ambivalence about that, and kind of that whole idea of, like life circumstances that take you somewhere and you're kind of ultimately happy to be there and can settle in, but that can be a real struggle to like figure out how you belong somewhere. There's also a lot of ambivalence about men and masculinity in this book. So I think all of the protagonists except one are female. And then there is one story where we get some points of view, a little bit of a young boy. But all the protagonists are female, and some of what they're struggling with is kind of relationships. And a lot of them have either bad relationships with men or a bad history of relationships with men. And so there's kind of a lot of ambivalence and exploration there. And then there's one recurring character. So several of the stories are actually about the same person who is a writer. She's a mother of two boys living in Florida, which, again, at least in its broad autobiographical sketch, is actually pretty reminiscent of Lauren Groff herself, who's a writer with two sons living in Florida. So you kind of wonder how real those stories are, but it is fiction. But anyway, in those stories, that character is showing a fair amount of ambivalence about motherhood. You know, the idea that she loves her sons and would do anything for them is never questioned. And I think most mothers can probably identify with that, at least on some level. But then there's a lot of ambivalence about all the rest of it. You know, there's some stuff about balancing work, about balancing your marriage, et cetera, in that context of motherhood. And I really appreciate that. I mean, I don't know. I feel ambivalent about motherhood sometimes. You know, I love my kid to pieces, and certainly my life is better with her in it in a lot of ways. But motherhood is really hard, and so I think it's very natural for everyone to feel ambivalence about that. So I really appreciated those aspects of those stories with that narrator in particular. I felt like I identified with her fairly strongly. So, yeah, just to wrap up, I really enjoyed this book. It was gorgeously written. I am going to read more by Lauren Groff. I have read in the past just I think her first novel, The Monsters of Templeton, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't like sweep me away. Whereas for large chunks of time reading this book, I just kind of felt swept away, and I actually devoured it in, I think, a 24-hour period. So definitely really enjoyed this book. If you've read it, I'd love to hear what you thought, and I'd love to hear what you think about other Lauren Groff books as well, since I'm intending to read more of her work someday. So hope everyone's having a great day. This should go up today, which is Wednesday. So it's hump day. We're halfway through the week, and I hope it's going well for everybody. Thanks. Bye.